Yo, what's up guys? It's Anthony from LIKBF. Alright, so the 2019 fishing season is finally upon us, thank God. And I got some new guys in the club, even some veteran anglers asking me, what type of rod and reel do you throw your chatterbait on? Or we even got some new guys that are buying their first baitcaster combo for the first time. So I know those tax returns are coming in. I want to help you guys spend that money wisely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of the baits that I throw. I'm going to show you each rod and why I chose that rod and reel combo to throw that bait. Hopefully this will answer some of your questions and help you guys make the right decision. Alright guys, let's jump right into this. Okay guys, so let's start off by talking about why it's so crucial to make the right rod and reel selection for a certain type of presentation. It's very similar to a golfer carrying multiple clubs in his bag. Each golf club is designed to hit the ball a certain distance and get a certain action out of the ball. Same thing with a rod and reel. Each rod has a built-in design to get a certain action out of the lure that you're throwing. So I'm going to go through some of my rod and reel combos one by one. We're going to start off, I'm going to show you the bait first, then I'm going to show you the rod and reel, and we'll even talk about the line and why I paired this up to that bait. Alright guys, so let's start off with one of the most commonly known combinations, which is the spinning combo. We use this, most of us start off with these when we're kids, and I use this like 90% of the time. I'm a finesse fisherman, so I like throwing soft plastics most of the time, so I always have one of these in my hand. Basically a spinning combination, what you want to do when you're throwing soft plastics, let me show you the bait first. This is a Neko rig bait. It's just a 4-inch worm with a nail in it, and basically I throw that on really light lines, 7-pound fluorocarbon. It's a light line. Fluorocarbon has low stretch to it. I always want to feel that bait on the bottom. That's a key. Guys, it's a good tip when selecting a rod and reel combination. You always want to make sure that you have contact with your bait. You always want to feel that bait on the end of the line. If you're not feeling your bait on the end of the line, that's a good indicator that you have too heavy of an action of a rod. So this is a actually, let me just read it right off the rod. This is a G Loomis rod. It's an E6X. It's a 7'1", so it's 7 feet 1 inch long, and it's a extra fast action rod. So it has an extra fast tip on it. With that extra fast bendy tip, when this light worm is down on the bottom, I want to be able to feel every bump, every tick. Sometimes with the soft plastics, they just suck it up and you don't really feel it. So this light rod tip is going to help me feel that bite. We're not really going to get too into the reel itself, because when it comes to a spinning reel, the spinning reel doesn't really have any effect on how you're working the bait. We work soft plastics with the tip, and we just use the reel to reel up the slack. So it's not as important as some of the bait casters where the reels have a direct impact on the action of the lure. So we won't get too into it, but this is a Stratic CI4. It's got a great drag on it. If anything, if I want to give you any tips on spinning reels, try to get one that has a good drag. If you have a cheap reel with a cheap drag, basically you might break your line. So it's good to invest in one that has a solid one. One other tip I like to give you guys when you're researching any gear, even if you don't shop there, go to Tackle Warehouse if you're looking at a certain rod or reel and read the reviews. I've learned so much just from reading how other people use these rod and reels, and sometimes I've made selections based on that alone. So that covers the spinning combo. Next we're going to dive into my second favorite, well, this is probably my favorite combination. This is my swim jig setup. Alright guys, so this is probably my favorite rod and reel combination. I love having this in my hand. I probably cover a lot of water with this rod and reel, and I use this most of the time. This is a 7'1" action, medium heavy rod. This rod is used for throwing swim jigs, chatterbaits, and spinner baits. This rod was actually designed for Fitzgerald rods by Brian Schmidt, exactly for throwing swim jigs. The reason why it's good for that is the tip. Again, you want the right action for these baits. So this has a nice soft tip. What I like to do is I like to skip my jigs or chatterbaits up under docks and laydowns, and then I like to work them out. And then if I hook up with a fish that takes me back down into that heavy stuff, I mean, it doesn't take long before this rod loads up, as you can see, and there's plenty of backbone to work those fish out. So it's got the perfect action, but it's got a soft enough tip where I can keep constant feel on my bait, especially the chatterbaits. I mean, that rod tip with that jackhammer, I mean, it vibrates, and then once that thing stops, you know you either got a log or a fish. So I usually throw 12 to 14 pound fluorocarbon. Here in the Northeast, our big fish are like 5 or 6 pounds. That's a hog, so 12 to 14 pound is good enough. Sunline Sniper, good line to rip them out of that heavy stuff. And I like a faster gear ratio. I throw a 7-3 to 1. I'm just used to it. I like slow rolling it over the grass, and then if one takes me down, I got that extra speed to reel up the slack and lay into that fish. And again, I use this rod for throwing swim jigs, chatterbaits, and spinnerbaits. Alright guys, so early spring is coming up. The next rod and reel combo we're going to talk about is a great selection for early spring. This is a jerkbait setup. How is a jerkbait setup different from the swim jig combo we just went over? Well, a jerkbait has a totally different action than a swim jig. A swim jig is constantly moving. With a jerkbait, you want to make that bait dart around and suspend in the water. In order to do that, you're going to need a rod with a really soft tip on it. So this rod has a much softer tip than that swim jig rod. Also, it has a parabolic bend in it. Reason for that, you're throwing a bait with treble hooks. Jerk baits have treble hooks on them, and so that parabolic bend in the rod, when you load up when the fish loads up and hits that jerk bait, is less likely for the fish to throw the bait because of that parabolic bend. There's not as much pullback as there is on the backbone of a heavier rod. So that's key when selecting a jerkbait rod. You want a good parabolic bend. I use a 13 fishing. This is the Fate series. This is a really good rod for jerkbait fishing. It's 6'7". You definitely want a shorter action because when you're working a jerkbait, I don't really have room to do it in here, but you want to point the rod tip at the water, and all the action is in working the slack. You don't want to pull on the line. You want to work this, just pop the slack in the line. So you want that short rod to be able to point it down at the water and yank that slack out. With a longer rod, your rod tip will be down in the water, and you're not going to be able to work the bait as effectively. I also like to use a slower gear ratio because I don't want to pull up that slack too much. The slack is where all the technique comes from. So I use a 6-6 to 1, which is a little slower gear ratio, so I don't pull all that slack up. I can still pull it up fast if I need to hook up with the fish, but it has enough slack in it where I could work the bait effectively. And the line I use 10 pound fluorocarbon Sunline Sniper. The reason I go to 10 pound is I want to get the bait down there a little more, and also it helps that bait suspend a little better than with a heavier line, because fluorocarbon sinks. So with a heavier line, it might pull the nose down rather than have it suspend naturally. So that's why I chose this rod and reel combination for my jerkbait setup. Alright guys, so the next combo we're going to talk about is a frog setup. So it starts getting into summer, the weeds start growing in, you start seeing lily pads, it's time to start throwing a topwater frog. What's a good combination for throwing a frog? I like a long rod. This is a 7'3" Dobbins Fury rod. It's a longer rod, which helps you get that fish up out of that thick cover. Like I said, lily pads, thick weeds, that fish is going to come up, blow up on that frog, and pull you down into some thick cover. You need a good long rod and a heavy rod. This is a heavy action rod as well. You need that heavy action with the backbone to get them up out of that cover. And by having a longer rod, once you move that rod tip, you're going to move more line, and it's going to get that fish up out of the cover. That being said, this rod also has a soft tip on it. The reason you want a little bit of a soft tip on a frog rod is to walk the dog, basically, or walking a frog. You want that side-to-side action. In order to get that side-to-side action when throwing a frog and working it, you need that little bit of tip. If you look at this rod, though, I mean, it has a little bit of tip to it, and then it loads up right away, right about here. Down, it's all backbone. So this is a perfect frog rod. I like throwing it on a 8 1-to-1, 13 fishing concept A. I like a fast gear ratio because once I know the bass has that frog in his mouth, I like to get that slack up and set the hook and get him in the boat. So between that long rod, heavy action, and that fast gear ratio, you're going to get that bass up out of the cover as soon as possible, which is key when frog fishing. In order to withstand that, you want to pair that up with a good heavy line. I throw Sunline FX3. This is a 65-pound braided line, which is more than heavy enough to get the job done. So yeah, that's basically the combination I throw when I'm looking to throw a frog. Alright guys, so the last combo we're going to talk about in this video is my punching setup. This is a heavy rod. It's almost like a broomstick. This rod was actually made by Fitzgerald Rods for punching grass mats on Lake Okeechobee. It's called the Okeechobee rod. This rod is 7 foot 6 inches long, and it's a very heavy action. It's rated up to 2 ounces and up to 80-pound braid. I use this rod in the summer for punching through thick grass mats. Sometimes the bass will get underneath these mats as cover, and the only way to get to them is to punch right through it. So I use very heavy braid, 65 pound at a minimum, and I use 1.5 ounces weight to get down through that stuff. So you need a good stout rod like this to get them out of there. Also, I pair that up with a fast gear ratio. I use a 7 1-to-1. This is a loose speed spool, and I like that 7 1-to-1 because it's got enough torque to get the bass up and out of that stuff and into the boat. So yeah, I love my punching setup. I've done really well with this over the past couple years in tournaments, and yeah, it's just a great setup for that technique. Alright guys, so that about wraps this one up. So we went over some of the more common baits that people use, soft plastics. We covered chatterbaits, frog, jerkbait. You know, I showed you guys the bait and how to match up the rod, reel, and line combo to that bait. So I hope this helps you guys out when you go to make those new gear selections before the season kicks off. If there's something I didn't cover, if I could answer any further questions for you guys before you spend your money, leave a comment down below. I'll get back to you and I'll help you make the right choice. Also, you could always use Tackle Warehouse if you're looking at a certain rod and reel combo. Look at the reviews on it, and other people basically tell you, exactly what they throw on it. So, all right, as always, guys, thanks for watching. If this video helped you guys out, please hit the subscribe button and give us a like. We're trying to grow the YouTube channel, and every little bit helps. So we appreciate you guys following along, and we'll see you in the next video.